Welcome to Life Empowers with Melissa Oden. Where there is life, there is hope. Where there is life, there's a place for love to grow, and love emboldens and strengthens. Where there is life, there's an opportunity to grow and be empowered. I'm living testament to that, and you are too. And if you don't yet feel like your life is testament to this, don't despair and don't stop listening to this podcast. This is exactly why I'm doing it. Thanks for joining me this week as we delve into so many life-affirming topics. Sarah Zagorski is from Louisiana, and Sarah is the New Orleans director of Louisiana Right to Life. And, I'll be perfectly honest. I love so many Right to Life organizations, but Louisiana Right to Life has an incredibly special place in my heart for many, many reasons. And, frankly, Sarah is one of them. Sarah, I can't even remember the first time we ever met. I can tell you where we met, but do you remember when it was?
Oh my goodness, it had to be like 2012 or 2013. I was fresh out of college and working for Louisiana Right to Life. And we were at a National Right to Life convention. I think that was the first time I met you. And I heard your story and I was so touched by it, moved by it, and how similar our stories, different parts of our stories were. So I think that's when we first met. And we just really, I think we spent a couple hours just in an afternoon one day talking about those things together.
And isn't that cool? I mean, that's one of my favorite things about, honestly, the work that I do is we have these opportunities to meet people and form relationships. And, gosh, your life has changed a lot since the first time we met. And even my life has changed a lot. And yeah, I just love how we have the opportunity to keep, just keep doing things together in this movement. Who would have thought the first time we met all those years ago, right?
Right. And now almost, I don't want to say 10 years later because that makes me feel old, but it feels like 10 years later, with everything that's happened in our country in the last 10 years, but just to see how we've both grown in understanding our stories. And I just am so thankful for everything that you've shown me about it too in this process.
No, and I thank you because, your voice is important and the work that you're doing with Louisiana Right to Life is important. And even, I know that you also do foster care and adoption work, and we're going to talk about that in another interview. But, for today, I thought it was important that we kind of unwrap the recent Supreme Court decision. And, who better to talk about it than somebody who's been witnessing it rolling out from the very beginning. So, if you just kind of want to give my listeners that information, the June versus medical decision that came out recently, why is that important?
So, absolutely. So back in 2014, when all this was happening, I was actually there at the Louisiana Right to Life office when this legislation was proposed by Representative at the time, now Senator Katrina Jackson. And it was birthed out of a place of hearing stories of women that had experienced sloppy abortion care. Not that I call it care, but that's what anyone in the medical world would call it, because you just hear these stories and you're like, they don't have the right equipment on hand. They aren't transferring to the same physician at a local hospital. That doesn't sound right. So I was there hearing those stories and hearing how these women were affected by that. And so was Katrina Jackson. And she brought the legislation forward because of those stories. So the basis of the legislation is that it required physicians to have admitting privileges at a local hospital, which means that in the event of an emergency or in a complication, which we know complications happen, the common complications of abortion are like hemorrhage, uterine perforation, those sort of things happen, that when that patient is then transferred to a hospital, they would have the same physician taking care of them. So it seemed like a really basic piece of legislation to us. It was brought forward by women. It was supported by women. It was carried in our House and our Senate by women. It was passed overwhelmingly and signed by our governor. So we thought this is a common sense piece of legislation that should have no problem. But of course, abortion proponents right away attacked it as what they call TRAP, a bill to limit abortion providers, and it was a big ordeal. So that was kind of the basic of the legislation then, but recently, a couple days ago, basically seems like maybe it was last week actually, the Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional, saying that it causes a substantial burden for a woman's access to have an abortion. So we were obviously deeply disappointed by that. But my take on it is I'm deeply disappointed because women deserve better. We both know that women deserve better than abortion. But in the event that they have an abortion, they should at least have the same standard of care of every other person receiving a surgery at an ambulatory surgical center, or what they call outpatient abortion facilities here. So that's kind of why we're so, I guess, devastated by this, just to say, wow, this is something we thought we could find common ground with abortion proponents on, and we can't even find that common ground with them. We can't even get to that place where we both see that abortion does have complications, and those complications should be handled by the same physician that performed the abortion. And then secondly, too, in Louisiana, we have an abortion facility in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that has a 40-year history of injuring women in unsafe abortions. I personally believe abortion is always unsafe because it ends the life of an unborn baby, but it's also these women are leaving with never the ability to have children again because they're getting a complete hysterectomy due to the abortion that they had, or whatever it might be. So we saw that history there. So that was another reason this law came forward, because of that clinic, specifically Delta Women's Clinic, they call it. So that's where we came from when we proposed it. And we were just obviously disappointed. But, we're going to move forward and continuing fighting for women and babies and saying, no, women deserve better than abortion. Women deserve better than being treated like, that they don't deserve equal care. And also that women deserve better than to be told that abortion, of course, is their only choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that, you made that point about trap laws, right? I mean,
yeah.
And I guess that's the question that's on my mind is, have you ever had anyone, and well, maybe we should back this up a little bit.
Sure.
Probably some people who listen to this podcast maybe don't understand the dynamics that exist in Louisiana when it comes to the political background, right, of the pro-life movement.
Sure.
This is a bunch of old white men, Republicans in Louisiana, introducing this kind of legislation, right?
No, this was an African-American Democrat that proposed the legislation in Louisiana. And that's something that we are so proud of in our state, that we have a pro-life majority of Republicans and Democrats, and that they're so bold and strong to say, no, I'm not going to stand with the abortion industry and what they do to women. And Katrina Jackson, I don't know if you've been able to meet with her or spend time with her, but she's just 100% in this. And I know she was deeply disappointed by this for the women that are now going to continue to suffer at the hands of the abortion industry and their ultimate goal, which is, in my view, is to exploit women and to make profit. But I think if you speak with her, you'll see that heart and that genuine desire to protect women from this. So that's something that is unique about our state, is that we do have pro-life majorities, and we have a pro-life governor right now too, who's a Democrat. So that's something a lot of people I know in the North are like, that's so unheard of to have even one pro-life Democrat in their state. So that's something we're very fortunate to have experienced and to work alongside them here. But I think like I said earlier, this is a common ground issue too. This wasn't the same as banning abortion at 6 weeks, right? It wasn't the same kind of bill like this. It was a bill to protect women from what we've seen over history and over time of what's happened in the abortion clinics here. And that's something you would think that abortion proponents would say, okay, this makes sense. But no, they didn't. They saw it as a way to stop abortion. So, and they see it that way now.
And isn't that how they term it every time, right? I mean, I'm just sitting here racking my brain, Sarah, thinking, gosh, have I ever heard an abortion supporter ever support a single piece of legislation that protected women, right? Not even just protecting children, but have I ever heard an abortion supporter, really just saying, gosh, yeah, I support that piece of legislation that protects women? I can't think of a single time.
No, absolutely not. And, unfortunately, too, they don't see the long-term effects of this. Like we had a press conference earlier this year, and there was a nurse who spoke at the press conference who, just a regular, person who was very unfamiliar with abortion in general. But she had been a nurse for 20 years. But during the 20 years as a nurse, she had a girl that was brought into her physician's office. She worked for a OBGYN, and this girl was brought to her clinic And the mother didn't explain what was going on right away. The girl was 16 years old. Okay. And what ended up happening is they realized when they went in that she had fetal body parts remaining from a botched abortion, this 16-year-old, and they had to perform a complete hysterectomy on a 16-year-old girl. And she had been traumatized by that experience. Like, she's telling me about it, and she has tears in her eyes. She's like, we did not. Now this doctor and I, the doctor she was working with, have to live with that memory, knowing that we caused this girl's barrenness. We didn't want to do that, but to save her life, we had to do that. All because a physician was sloppy in their work and killing her unborn baby, which is bad enough, but just causing that child essentially to never have a child again. It was just horrific. So these are the kind of stories you hear and you're like, I don't understand why anybody would see this as not a common sense thing, like a common sense law, So just the effects that go beyond even the woman to the healthcare industry and those people that are working in there, that you hear these stories of the trauma they've experienced by having to see this in front of them.
Absolutely. And know that they want to prevent that from happening to other women, right? And as medical professionals in a world that, essentially, right, sometimes we make the mistake of putting doctors on pedestals.
Right.
But, we take their experience and their knowledge, of the utmost importance. And here they're saying, gosh, you know what, if we want to protect women, these kind of things need to happen. But yet it seems like only certain doctors have a voice, right?
Right. Well, and, during this whole process, we had physicians testify about how necessary this legislation was here. And I was just stunned that with all the testimony, if you go and read back at all the testimony of women that have experienced just horrific experiences inside of these abortion clinics, I was just surprised that they could rule this way. I'm not surprised because it is kind of the world we live in and this our pro-life advocacy to protect women and to protect babies. But I was just surprised that they could turn a blind eye and say, no, we're not going to uphold this law, even though it's common sense. And this was our state's House and Senate that decided together in a bipartisan way. And that's what I guess upsets me the most, is that the people of our state decided this, and now a higher court's coming in and saying, no, we're not going to uphold this. So it's just so disappointing. And I know we're going to move forward past this and we're going to continue on our work. And that day, I was personally just in shock. I just stayed in shock all day. But ever since, I feel like I've been just grieving for all the women I know that have experienced botched abortions and have been scarred by their abortion experiences, been scarred by the words the abortionists have said to them about how, we have one lady who boldly shares her story all the time, how the abortionist said, get up and get out. She went on the ground outside and had blood all over her. Like, this sounds like, it's horrific. It's like a horror movie. You hear some of these stories. So that should never happen. And I guess one of the arguments we often hear is that, oh, that's so rare, right? Or that happens so infrequently. And I'm sure you hear that all the time, right, Melissa, with your story? That never happens, right? Well, actually, listen is what people need to do. Listen and hear how common it actually is for a woman to experience this. And I know I'm not giving you much to take a break and ask me questions in here, but in my personal experience too, I say if you listen to the voices of women, you'll hear the truth of what's happening. But unfortunately, a lot of those who are affected by this kind of by this kind of substandard care are women who are poor, women who feel like they have no voice, women who feel they can't speak up because they're trapped in whatever, or maybe a cycle of poverty. Maybe they're already victims of abuse of some kind. So they go and they experience this at an abortion clinic. And guess what? It's common with whatever else they're experiencing every day, just more abuse. So it's like, those are the women that are experiencing this. So of course we're not going to hear every single story, but the stories we hear are enough, so that's my perspective on it. It's just it hits so close to home for me. So.
Yeah. And I know it does. Right. And that's what I want people to understand. I mean, I know that people listening to this absolutely will understand that you have a heart for women as well as children, but knowing you the way that I do, Sarah, I know how much you understand how women are, especially women of color, right? And women of low socioeconomic status, right? How women in vulnerable positions are exploited by the abortion industry. And then, their voices are not heard, right? I mean, we don't have them going to a hospital necessarily to receive the care that they deserve. We have them not being able to prosecute abortionists, right? Who is advocating for them and who is listening? And, I can't help but think how many women are watching this unfold, right? And think, yeah, I guess they don't care, right? I guess the world out there doesn't really care that much what happens to me. I mean, I hope they see that what's happening, that it's the pro-life movement that does care about them. But we know that the media and our culture tries to paint us into the corner, that it is a trap law, that we never had good intentions in the first place.
Well, and too, another thing that's always brought up in June Medical that we often say is, this was that the abortion industry is trying to defend itself tried to defend themselves in this case. And really, they shouldn't be speaking in this case at all, because it should be the women speaking, saying, here are the stories of what's happening. Here's what's going on. This is what we need here in our state. But instead, the abortion industry came in and said, they're just trying to limit abortion rather than listening. They're trying to silence the stories, and they're actually furthering, they're always saying that women are oppressed, and that if we don't celebrate abortion, then we're somehow oppressing women and their rights. But actually, they're the ones oppressing women by trying to shut them up from sharing the truth of their own experiences. And that's just tragic on top of everything else. And we know, too, that women who have experienced the trauma of abortion often don't speak about it, often don't want to go back to those memories, often don't want to relive that trauma. So if they're already in that place, they're not going to want to go on a microphone and share that story all the time. But we didn't even have them. We had so many women come out of the woodwork in Louisiana that that were vocal about their experiences. We're just like, we have to do something about this. So it was just, it was disappointing and devastating for us, just see it happen this way, and for the Supreme Court to decide this way, despite all the evidence that it was necessary and needed in our state. So we're going to continue on and continue fighting for women and babies. We're definitely not going to quit now, but we hope that eventually the court will see differently on this, and of course differently in abortion altogether.
Yeah, that was going to be really my kind of final question as we look into this decision is, where do we go from here? I mean, to be perfectly honest, we have a very similar, surprise, we have a very similar abortion clinic in Missouri. We have one standing abortion clinic in St. Louis. We have one in Kansas City that kind of pops up from time to time. We have one in Columbia that has popped up from time to time, but they don't like to, follow regulations, right? So they tend to then, they go quiet again for a little while before they pop back up again. But St. Louis, my goodness, that Baton Rouge, I've seen the picture of the clinic in Baton Rouge, Sarah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me so much of the one in St. Louis. I think we're at well over 80 ambulance calls in just a small number of years, right, that we know of, that we've been able to pay attention to. And, that St. Louis clinic made the news recently because we did have a recent ruling because they had lost their license because of, just not following procedure, and they weren't cooperating with just basic investigation. And there were all these stories, just like you were talking about, all of these stories of women who suffered botched abortions, were suffering physically, times where women were having multiple abortions because they were leaving baby body parts inside of the woman. Talk about the trauma women go through.
Right.
Do they not think that it's really traumatic for a woman to be told, well, part of the baby is still inside you? We know that's not what they say, right? They have their fancy terminology. Right. But to go under time and time again, and then what are the emotional and mental and physical effects of that for a woman? It's just devastating.
Right. Well, and I think, one of the things we know here, too, is that the abortion clinics here don't want to call the ambulance. They don't even want to do that because they know that that's going to cause a scene. And they know that's going to bring attention to themselves. So who knows how many women, and that's another thing was hard about this, just accepting this ruling and saying, okay, now what? But to know that there's so many women that are suffering that we don't see and don't know, and that they can't speak up because, like you said, they don't have the financial ability to speak up. They don't have the voice. They don't have the strength internally to stand up. And they're just experiencing it over and over again, like you said, almost like repeat abortions, right? So it's just horrific to see that the abortion industry, once again, that the Supreme Court's siding with them and saying, we're going to oppress them further. And that's my view of it. They're continuing to oppress women by this ruling, the opposite of what the abortion industry is saying, But I guess to your question, where do we go from here? We dust off our shoes and we say, you know what? I'm not going to stop until abortion is eradicated from our society. And that's my view is, regardless of the outcome, I know what the trauma of abortion brings to women, and I'm dedicated to eradicating that in whatever capacity I can. And for helping people who do have different views to think about it and say, I could see how that could be traumatic for a woman. We should stand for this together. And hopefully one day we'll come to a place where we can agree on at least that with those who disagree with us,
So do you feel like the greatest thing that people could do right now is really pursue that piece of educating the culture, educating the women? Or, I mean, what are your next steps? What would you suggest to someone who wants to make a difference in spite of this ruling?
I would say start, I say we need to continue to listen to the stories of women and not give up hope for something better for them. And I think a lot of people, they after this decision came out, I know for us, it was just so hard. And I definitely get that. It was hard for me too. But I think it's because of the women and the stories we hear that we can't stop. That if you want to make a difference, get educated on abortion first off. Get educated on what it does to the unborn child, and then get educated on what it does to the woman herself, and hear the stories of the women that have regretted their abortions deeply and sincerely, and what happens afterwards, and how their lives, what brings them to that conclusion that abortion hurt them so definitively and permanently. And after that, connect with your local pro-life organization to see what you can do to support them, because we're going to continue on. At Louisiana Right to Life, we're working on the Love Life Amendment right now, which will ensure that our state constitution doesn't allow for abortion in the event that Roe versus Wade is overturned, which is a really important amendment on our ballot, on the presidential ballot later this year. So we're continuing our work to try to make our state as pro-life as possible, and just partner with whoever's in your state to do the same thing. That's what our goal is, kind of just moving forward and saying, this is what we have to do. This is what we're going to continue to do, because women are continually being hurt, regardless about how discouraged I feel right now. Women are still being traumatized by this. So I need to move on and step up and continue what I'm doing.
Perfect. Completely agree, because it's easy to get discouraged in this,
yes.
right?
Yes.
If we look at the small picture, but the big picture tells us that this is just really one small blip on the screen when it comes to what everybody's doing every single day.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, I have one final question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready for it?
Sure, I guess.
It's a whole lot easier than talking about court cases. We'll just put it that way. Okay, so here's the question. What would you say to someone, or what do you say to someone when they tell you that abortion empowers women?
I would say that abortion certainly didn't empower any of the women in my life that I know of. I know, my story, Melissa, but, my birth mother, it didn't empower even beyond my own story, but the previous abortion she had in her life, she grieved deeply over, and they only furthered her oppression in her life. The abortion my adopted mother had only furthered the oppression in her life and brought her to a place of committing suicide. So for me, I've never met someone that has said, I celebrate my abortion experience. It has empowered me to continue on my life, make my life better. Every woman I've talked to about their abortion experience has brought them great grief and great pain, and has only brought them heartache. And that's why when I hear the other side saying that it empowers them and brings them more opportunity and more things and more goodness in life, I say, you need to listen to all the stories before you come to that conclusion, because that is not everyone's story. And I can't get into the psychology of the story of one person who might say that, right? But I can tell you that I've never met somebody personally myself that has been empowered by abortion.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that analysis. I know it's not been an easy time for you, but like I said, out of anybody that I would trust to be able to break this down, you are definitely high on that list. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me this week on Life Empowers. I hope you found our time together to be life affirming, hope building, encouraging, informative. And remember, the next time someone states that abortion is empowering, you know better. Life empowers. See you again next week.